talk about what to do. Really spun out of some of the lectures we had on neurophysiology. So about 60 years ago, Alan Turing, the father of modern artificial intelligence, asked the question, can machines think? And if you think about it, it's a deceivingly difficult question to answer. I mean, what is thought? Is it processing information? Is it something more intangible, like coming up with a new idea? Or is it something so fundamentally human that no machine could ever produce? These are our 5 senses. They serve to transduce different forms of energy, such as electromagnetic, mechanical, chemical energy, and electrical signals that our brain can understand, process, and use to produce new ideas about our environment. But in this talk, I want to think about these inputs not as forms of energy, but as little bits of data. In this analogy, the brain is really a sort of statistician or scientist that harvests data from data collectors and uses it to discern patterns in our environment that are correlating with pleasurable or discomforting outcomes. So if we look inside the brain, as you all know, we'll find nearly 100 billion neurons. And they all communicate with each other electrically through connections called synapses. And if we look closer at these synapses, we'll find that they're actually really quite plastic. Here you see the axon of one neuron forming a new synapse with the dendrite of another neuron. And it's this plasticity, this remarkable ability of the brain to change that allows us to be very adaptive to our environment, an environment that's always changing. So, if you think about it, the brain has really 3 fundamental components. Processing units, a way to connect these units, and a way to fine-tune these changes if we want to. And it got biologists and neuroscientists and computer scientists thinking 20 or 30 years ago, if it was possible that these are the only 3 things we need to produce a machine capable of learning. And furthermore, if you could impart this machine, feed it experiences, teach it, could you in fact have a basic level of artificial intelligence? So, 2 months ago when I was sitting in this class, as we all were, learning about neural circuitry, I thought about how unexceptional I was at forecasting NCAA tournament bracket results. And, you know, my bracket's never been above average. I've never won a bracket pool in my life. And I thought, you know, this year is going to be different. This year, I was going to come up with some objective way to forecast the NCAA tournament. And so I thought of the artificial neural network. The artificial neural network is a computational reconstruction of the same neural circuitry in our brain that works so wonderfully in real life. It's essentially composed of sensory neurons that can accept numerical data, and this can, for example, be the difference in free throw percentage between Team 1 and Team 2, whose matchup we're interested in forecasting. Depending on the magnitude of this data and the type of sensor, some of these sensors can be activated, and they will send an inhibitory or excitatory impulse to a postsynaptic interneuron, which can do the same for an output neuron. Based on the spatial summation of the signal that comes to the output neuron, it may or may not fire. And in the case when it does fire, as you see here, the whole network is projecting that Team 1 will win. Now, suppose that this was a training game, and we knew that Team 1 actually lost. Well, this information can be used and mathematically back-propagated through the network and used to update the synapses that should have been acting more strongly and weakening the synapses that were working too hard. And this sort of backpropagation is what internalizes the process of biological synaptic plasticity in a sort of a computational world. It allows our network to be malleable and learn in a data-driven way. Now, like all of us here, we're all different. Some of us are better at math, others are artists. Similarly, each neural network is born a little bit different than everyone else. Imagine if we could encode uniquely a network as a string of numbers, which we'll call its genome. And we can store this genome in this abstract representation of an organism, a circle. And imagine we had a few hundred of these organisms, of these neural networks. If I train these networks using the back propagation I described earlier, what I'll find is that over a few thousand training days, some of these networks just perform better than others. Don't know why, they just do. And leveraging the principles of natural selection, we can destroy the ones that are weak and let the ones that are strong continue on and mate and have their genomes recombined to form children that are, in theory, on average, going to be stronger than their parents. And we can repeat this process indefinitely until we arrive at some sort of golden population, a committee of neural networks that, in theory, should be much more powerful at classifying basketball games than their ancestors. So how does it work in practice? On the x-axis here, I've plotted the generation, and on the y-axis, I've plotted the population fitness, or the fitness of all of these neural networks that are being enrolled. You can see in the first 100 million iterations or so, these networks are evolving quite fast. And by the time it gets to 150 million iterations, the increase in the learning curve is sort of stabilized. And what you do notice is the variance of the prediction starts to decrease, and it suggests that a lot of these networks, the whole population is experiencing some sort of stabilizing selection, and they're becoming more accurate and more homogeneous. So, of course, now you guys are wondering, okay, that's all great. How does it do in a real tournament? So this is how my bracket fared. And you can see, for example, the Midwest was pretty well behaved and predictions were good. By contrast, the West was definitely wild this year, and the predictions were not so good. And I'm interested now to look into these games and see what are the underlying signals. What is it that these networks are missing? These networks should be able to discern patterns in numerical data. Are these upsets truly random? And then also look to, just to compare how the performance of these networks do against real humans. I downloaded 4,000 brackets from CBS and their scores, and these were brackets submitted by real people, and plot a histogram of the score distribution. And you can see that the A&N committee does better than the average human. So with that, I'd just like to come back to Turing's question about can machines think? And certainly a machine like this, which is the best neural network that was evolved in this evolutionary process, it can't think. It's just passive. It just gets stimulated by data and fires of 1 or 0 suggesting a win or loss. But as we continue to develop architectures with more neurons and hardware that closely mimics neurophysiology, I think we can, hopefully in the next 10 to 20 years, see real computers that are able to think. And if we don't see computers that are capable of generating their own thoughts, I think we'll at least see machines that are capable of supplementing ours. So with that, I'd just like to thank Professor Gemma for allowing me to take on this project. Sort of a tangent from anatomy and physiology, but I've learned quite a lot about neurophysiology, and I'm really thankful for his guidance. Also like to thank Professor Vladimir Yoyich, who's my computer science mentor, and without him I would know very little about machine learning. And that's all I have. Thanks for your attention.